Hey, back again with another DDR video. I believe this is going to be part 6 in my New York City DDR history series. So I wanted to make a video kind of in between my last video where I spoke about playing Stefan and going into 2004, because 2004 was like a pivotal year for me playing DDR. But before that, I have to do a little bit like of level setting when it comes to that, for anybody who's along for the ride of like not only the history of DDR in New York City, but like my perspective of it anyway, because this is, you know, this series is probably a little biased and this is coming from my lens. I probably forgot a ton of stuff, which is one of the reasons why I would like to interview people. And this video kind of touches on, like, it may give a little insight as to why DDR meant so much to me and why it imprinted on me the way that it did. So this is kind of what was going on in my life around this time, and just like more of like a personal, a deeper look into like my personal life and like, you know, how I viewed things back then. Try to keep it as relevant as I can to DDR, but this is just to give a little perspective. So, you know, first and foremost, when I was playing DDR around this time, one of the driving factors for a lot of things that were going on in my life was that my mother was sick. I lived with my mom around this time, and you know, one thing that I didn't mention in one of my previous videos was that when I first started playing DDR and I was in Broadway City one day, I was by myself waiting to play on I think it was like a Friday afternoon. And I got a call from somebody at my mom's job saying that my mom had a heart attack. So I remember rushing out of Broadway City. I had like a $20 Broadway City, you know, game card. I just gave it. I think I gave it to my friend Ash, who back then I didn't know him at the time. I just gave it to him, and I went rushing to the hospital. And you know, my mom wound up having a heart attack, and that changed a lot for me in my life around that time. I was 18 years old. Like I mentioned in, you know, my first video, I had just gotten out of a relationship, so it was just like me and my mom, and I was living at home. But after her having this heart attack, like, I basically became her caregiver, and it was a scare. She had a heart attack. She had been my mom smoked most of her life, so you know, after this heart attack, she reduced the amount of cigarettes that she smoked, but she was a smoker because it's very difficult to quit smoking. She had also been diagnosed with congestive heart failure and heart disease. So these things were all new to me. I didn't expect to go from graduating high school and you know, going into college, and then also playing this video game, to having to take care of a parent. Like, that just, I didn't see that coming, really. So that kind of dictated a lot of stuff in my life. So as I played DDR, every time I went out to a tournament or to an arcade or anything, like, I had my cell phone was always like glued to me, because at any given point in time, like, I would get a phone call from my mom saying that she couldn't breathe. She was having trouble breathing because she was also diagnosed with emphysema. And you know, sometimes I would have to leave the arcade to come home because, like, she would call the ambulance, and like, she would have to get rushed to the hospital because either she was having chest pains or she couldn't breathe. A lot of it was emphysema, but that, you know, that really dictated a lot of stuff in my life. And what I think happened was, I was already into DDR for an emotional reason, but I think I also used DDR as a form of escapism, because that reality of like watching your parents slowly get more and more sick was a hard reality to like come to terms with. So me going into the arcades and putting all my energy, I had already gotten over the person that I wasn't with anymore. But I think life was so stressful to like wonder if the only person you have in your life is gonna die, you know, is a very scary thought. So I focused a lot of energy on DDR because of that. And that was all throughout my DDR, you know. Like, just I had to take care of my mom. Her health declined more and more as time went on into 2002, 2003, 2004, and so on. But it took a while to come to terms with that. So that was really difficult. And I think I used a lot of my energy to play DDR, so that I didn't have to face that reality so head on. And another thing that kind of dictated a lot of, well, not dictated a lot of stuff, but this is one thing that I always tell people: if I could go back and do the DDR stuff again, one of my regrets was that I was in a relationship throughout the whole time I played DDR. So I got out of a relationship when I first started playing DDR. Like I mentioned, I was with a girl from basically 1997 until 2001, and then the end of 2001, around the beginning of 2002, and I was single going into playing DDR. Me and my cousin would play. I had friends and so on and so forth. And then around August of 2002, 123 Kid took me to Staten Island because he had a girlfriend out there and she had a friend. So I went out there and wound up meeting one of his girlfriend's friends and got into a relationship with this girl, and I was with that girl for 4 years. I was with her essentially the whole time I played DDR, from 2002 until the end of 2005, the beginning of 2006. And it wasn't the healthiest relationship. We were young, and I really wish that I could have done DDR again, not in that relationship. And I think there are personal reasons why. I think I'm not a super religious person. I wouldn't call myself an atheist, but I do think that I was in that relationship for a very specific reason, which I can't really talk about on here, but I do think that I was in that relationship for a very specific reason, which I learned later on down the line. But I do wish that I could have, hindsight's 2020, and it would have been nice to experience the community and meet all these people. And I was young, and there were a lot of women around my age, or girls around my age in the DDR community who maybe I would have dated, or it would have just been nice to be more free and open. And I'm not saying it's this person's fault. This person actually passed away earlier this year, unfortunately. She passed away. She had health complications even when we dated, but she is ultimately a nice girl. We were together for a few years, and I wish I could have went back, and I wish I could have did DDR again, but just not be in a relationship, And it wasn't a dependency thing, because I was okay being single. It's just I was also I was a very monogamous person. If I'm in a relationship, then I'm in a relationship, and I felt like that was the right thing to do. Me and this girl had been together. We had been on a few breaks throughout that relationship, but for the most part, I was with her for 4 years again. I was with another person for 4 years. So, I felt like that was the right thing to do at the time, but if I could go back and do it again, I would not have been in a relationship playing this game and being part of this community, because I feel like it would have been better that way. So that's just, I had been in a relationship 2004, all that, deep in this relationship. That was, one thing that maybe if I'm psychoanalyzing myself, my life got very stressful very fast, becoming the caretaker of a sick parent, and I was into DDR, and I loved playing DDR. It wasn't just a form of escapism, but I did love playing DDR, but I did use it to distract myself. I also went into this phase during this time where I had a ridiculous amount of pets. I had a bunch of pet rats, I had pet gerbils, I had pet rodents, pet mice, pet hamsters. My living room was just full of rodent cages, because I'm an animal lover. I do love animals, but I think that was also along with DDR and all that, it was just a form of escapism, because my life was so stressful. that like I was just like doing things to make me happy, like instant gratification without thinking about like, is this really good for me? Like, is this really something that I need right now in my life? So it seems irrelevant, but it's just kind of like it's really what it is just providing perspective, because I do want some of this to be like, to like have a personal touch. So I excuse me, I think that if I could go back and do it again, I just would have been more focused. I would still play DDR if I could go back and do it again, but I think I would have just shifted my priorities. During this time, like I had stopped going to college. I was just working and just not really sure where I wanted to go with my life or what I wanted to do with my life. I knew that when I did go back to college, I wanted to be an accountant. At the time, anyway, that's what I wanted to go to college for. But I had stopped going to college because I just wasn't in the right headspace to go. I didn't know the direction that DDR was going to go, but in my head, I was going to play for the foreseeable future. And I hoped that it had some form of commercial success. This was in the early days of video games being successful. So like in 2004, there really wasn't too many people living or eating off of video games. And like me talking about like people being successful in terms of video games and DDR has its place, which is not necessarily right now. But what I will say is I remember being at the first Digital Life DDR at NYC Jacob Javits tournament, and I do remember like in 2000, I believe this was the 2004 tournament, and it might have been the 2005 tournament, but I remember behind the DDR tournament there was a Halo tournament going on. I believe it was either Halo or Counter-Strike. I knew what Halo was. I wasn't familiar with Counter-Strike at the time. And the DDR tournament in 2004 had a first prize of $1,000, which, you know, when you're in your late teens, early 20s, that's a decent amount of money. That's nice. And in 2005, the Jacob Javits DDR tournament's first prize was $2,000. That was the one that I won, which I'll talk about later down the line. But I remember like at some point, like I didn't even know that the first person shooter tournament was behind us, but like I saw this line on like a Saturday of like a couple hundred people, and I was like, what game is that? Like it was just a bunch of computer setups. I didn't even know. And I think I asked one of the guys on the line, like, what game is this for? Like, what is this for? He told me either Halo or Counter-Strike. And I was like, oh, what's the first prize? And he said something like $30,000-$40,000. And that was one of the first times it put into perspective, like, wow, like I thought that we were getting a decent amount of money playing in this DDR tournament. This Jacob Javits Digital Life tournament was one of the biggest DDR tournaments that had ever happened at that time. So I thought $1,000 or $2,000 was good money. And these guys were behind us playing for like 5 figures worth of money. That kind of blew my mind. But yeah, like DDR was intertwined in my life around this time, like around 2004. I remember like one of my biggest dreams was for a DDR machine to be in my neighborhood, so that the people who I grew up with in my neighborhood in Park Slope in Brooklyn got to see me play DDR like in real life. Like I just used to dream about like walking down Fifth Avenue in my neighborhood and walking past a pizzeria or a video store and looking in and seeing a DDR Extreme and being like, oh, it's on. And that would be my home arcade, and I would just play. And that never really happened. In 2006, I believe, or late 2005, there was a little arcade that opened up in like the South Slope Greenwood Heights area. This was after I stopped playing, and they had a DDR Extreme, and they had it In the Groove too. And I used to work with the arcade owner a little bit to try to like, I did a couple of tournaments for them. I was trying to tell them like, if you take care of these machines and you post on these forums, you can get people to come here to play DDR. But I think that just like all the other arcades in the city, that arcade kind of died out and it never really picked up. So yeah, like a lot of things were going on in my life around this time in the background.
and I was getting better at DDR, but this is like my personal life and how like intertwined in DDR. Also around this time, like my friends, I was always like big into friendships, and my friends were like everything to me. So we had this group DDPD, which what happened with DDPD was we were a popular group when it was Omar and Stefan and Jing and me and Fat Axel, and then Omar and Stefan left. Not Stefan, I'm sorry. Omar left. So then it was me and Stefan and Fat Axel and Jing. And then Ash, his nickname was Devil in Black. He came into the group. And I don't know if there was anybody else before that, but what wound up, maybe Visor was in DDPD early on too. And Visor wound up changing his nickname to 12, I believe. But when I had control over DDPD, I went through this phase where I really wanted to grow the group. I wanted it to be like this conglomerate, this big group. I wanted it all up and down the East Coast. So I was like letting people into DDPD left and right, and we let a player from, I don't know if Nick is from Syracuse or Rochester, because I know those two places are somewhat in the same general area of New York State. But Nick, whose nickname is Tech Nick, we put him in DDPD. And Nick went on to be like a really good DDR player. I think I liked playing with Nick because he was a representation. He was one of a few people that I got to play who was a representation of like what was going on with the DDR community. For like what Nick has accomplished, he accomplished a lot of good stuff in DDR, but like Nick had like AAA almost the whole game. Like he AAA most of Extreme, if not the whole game. And so like I felt like if I got to play Nick, if I could like compare myself against Nick, then I knew what it would have been like to play against other people around that time. We also let Red Chrono into DDPD, and Red Chrono, his name was Dewey. He was from Albany, the Albany area, and he used to stealth. I think he had more stealths than me, because at one point, I think my list of stealth songs was, I had Moving On, In the Heat of the Night. My third stealth was Holic, and then I stealthed Max Unlimited, I stealthed Max 300, I stealthed Twilight Zone, I stealthed the song Young Forever on 5th Mix, Look to the Sky, Justify My Love. I stealthed So Deep. I stealthed The Legend of Max. Well over 10 songs already. I stealthed PSM Heavy, PSM Oni. Am I forgetting anything? I had a lot of stealths. I stealthed a lot of songs, but Red Chrono had more stealths. Oh, I stealth spin the disc too, but Red Chrono had more stealths than I had. Like he memorized more songs than me. He had a lot of stealth, so we put him in DDPD. And then there were two people in the Northeast. They were like from like the Maine area, like Maine, Massachusetts. I can't remember their names. I just remember having conversations with them, and I had met them at CSA 1, I believe. It wasn't Reflex, but it was like another guy from the Northeast area who looked a little bit like Reflex. Because Reflex was younger than a lot of us, and this kid was also younger than us. And I put him in DDPD, and I had put another guy in DDPD, and I think it started to become a lot less exclusive, and I think that kind of pissed off some of my friends in New York City, like Ash and Jinx and Fat Axel. So after that happened, I think we had kind of had a little bit of an argument, and DDPD disbanded for a while. Like we were like, we're not doing it anymore. They didn't want to be in it. I think they removed themselves from it, and then I was like, well, if y'all not gonna be in it, then I'm not gonna be in it. And we just kind of stopped being DDPD for a little bit. And I remember me and my friend Angel, me and Fat Axel, and our friend David, nicknamed Togo, we made this little group called The Three. I think this is around the time that Lord of the Rings came out. You know, it was like modeled after like the 9 in Lord of the Rings. So like we had this little group called The Three, and we were just like, we were trying to hammer out like 10-footers and just get really good. But eventually we recreated DDPD. We kind of like closed it up a little bit. We made it a little bit tighter, and it wound up being, you know, me, so Sketch, Fat Axel, Jinx, Devil in Black, Visor. Our friend Neil was in DDPD. I think his nickname was Oshino, Tank. And then our friend Jason, whose nickname was Lone Wolf, he was in DDPD. He used to stealth a lot of the Sorrow songs, like I think he stealthed Vanity Angel, L'Amour. So he was in DDPD. We had a friend named Blake. His nickname was Blake because his last name was Blake and his first name was Khalil. And he was a good friend to all of us. Like, he was just like a funny guy to be around, really smart guy, and he was in DDPD. He was in it. And then Togo David was also in DDPD. And then we had our friend Adam, whose nickname was Adam STF. So him and his girlfriend at the time, you know, who's his wife Anita, they would come around to arcades a lot. They were always really nice. Before I knew them, like I'm saying, like before I knew them, like they were always really, really cool when they came around the arcades. But eventually we put him in DDPD also. We asked him to be in DDPD, and I had a lot of good, fond memories with Adam. I remember like there was this one weekend that I had where like what it was like my house was the spot where a lot of people came through to my house to chill, and we would come to my house, and after a day at the arcade, everybody would come back to my place. I lived on President Street in Park Slope in Brooklyn, and play Step Mania and play all of the Japanese mixes on our fingers and hang out and watch, you know, G.I. Joe voiceover meme videos on, like, you know, whatever website you were able to download videos for at the time. And my house was the spot. But Adam, sometimes he would come through, but like him and Anita, like they lived together, so like they would go back home together at the end of the day most of the time. Well, one weekend I think Anita was going away on business, so it was just Adam by himself, and he was gonna like sleep over. He was gonna like come through, because that's what most people did. We would go to arcades, and then people come back to my house and crash for the night. So Adam, like, he planned out for this, so like it was fun. Like I don't remember what arcade we went to the day before, but like we went to the arcade, we tired ourselves out, came back to my place, ordered food, hung out, played Step Mania, fell asleep, woke up early the next day, and then drove down to Coney Island because Adam also had a car. So like it was just a fun weekend. We went to Coney Island, played edits, played 10-footers, you know, but we all had a good time with Adam. Adam would drive us out to Long Island because Long Island wasn't the easiest place to get to if you didn't have a car. So Adam would drive us out there. So those were most of the people in DDPD at the time. Jing kind of fell back from the scene. You didn't really see Edwin too much around the 2004 time period. But if he came around, we weren't gonna say that he wasn't in DDPD. He was more so from like the old school time period, like 5th mix, 7th mix. And then Stefan, we weren't gonna say that Stefan wasn't 123 Kid wasn't in DDPD. It's just that he lived in Connecticut, so you know, I think he did his thing in Connecticut. Whenever he did get around to a DDR machine, there were people in that area, not in Connecticut necessarily, but like in the Northeast. Oh man, I don't remember any of these players' names, but there were people out there that were good in DDR around this time period. And if you look on like the Legend Rose scores, there was a guy out there, there was a couple kids out there who were good in DDR, and there was a bus in Chinatown that used to go from Chinatown in New York to Boston. And I think me and Fat Axel had planned to go out there one day to kind of scout the area, like to see like what's going on out here, because all of a sudden these people from Boston were like putting up these Legend Row scores and these 10-footer scores. And we never made it out there. We just never got around to planning it. But I think Stefan won a couple tournaments in that region of the country too. Like he played out there for a little bit.
I wish I remember. I'll put up the person's name because I'll look it up after I do this video when I'm editing it, and I'll put it up because I saw this person's name a few months ago, their nickname. But I remember chatting with them on AOL Instant Messenger, and I was trying to like feel it out, like because I think that they had AAA either Max 300 or Unlimited or the Legend of Max. They AAA one of the Maxes, and I remember a lot of people on Aaron in Japan. It's not that people didn't believe it, but like it was almost like, where did these people come from? They just came out of nowhere. We don't hear anything about these people, and all of a sudden they're like AAA and 10-footers. So I remember chatting with them. This is like when in New York, it was just like, okay, like you AAA Max 300, but like in our head it was like, but like, what are you playing on options? Like, what's your shuffle scores or whatever? And I remember chatting with him, just trying to feel it out. Like, so do you ever play these 10-footers on shuffle? And he thought it was hilarious that I even asked that. Like, he was like, of course not. Like, why would anybody do that? Like, I forgot what his response was, but whatever his response was like, he thought it was funny that I was even asking him that. Like, he was like, why would anybody play them on shuffle? And so like, I just left the conversation alone. I was like, okay, all right. Because at this time, like me and Fat Axel and even Adam STF, Adam was one of the better players in our group and in the country, just because of like the we were like a vortex in New York. Like it just got so we got so competitive within each other, within DDPD, and then even within the city. Like, if you weren't worrying about me, you were worrying about Big Mac or Chris Fire or Dino. So like, people were so worried about other New York City players that you would go somewhere else and like you would just be like, oh, like I'm better than everybody over here because my competition. I'm so worried about like, damn, Sketch is getting like consistently getting like less than 5 greats on Max Unlimited. I go somewhere else, I'm picking like Adam or like Fat Axel would go to these tournaments and they would like play people, and it would just be like they would beat a lot of people because their normal gameplay was so out of this world compared to the rest of the DDR community around us at the time. So I always thought that was cool. I used to love going to tournaments with Devil and Black because Ash. The thing about Ash was a little heavy. He was like heavy set. So a lot of times when we would go to tournaments, especially like out of state tournaments, people who didn't know who Ash was, like they would play him and they would pick, like around the 2004 time period, most people still were trying to avoid the hard 10-footers. So people at this point it was very common to see like people doing okay on Max 300 and Paranoia Survivor and PSM Heavy, and then even the Legend of Max, but a lot of people still were trying to avoid Max Unlimited and PSMO. So they would go up against Ash and they would just size him up, and they would just assume because this was like a kind of a more of a heavy set guy, I'm gonna pick Max 300. The thing was that Ash had been playing with us so much that Ash was better at Max 300 than most people anyway. So they'd pick Max 300 on him. He would get like 9 greats on it, and they would get like 15 greats on it. And then now they just wasted their song in a tournament on him because they thought that because he was big that he couldn't do it. Ash was good at almost everything in DDR as well, except for like PSMO and maybe Max Unlimited. But like you couldn't just like go against Ash and like pick anything. Ash was good at almost everything in DDR. I remember I had an edit for Paranoia Survivor that had the steps for PSMO because Paranoia Survivor was 270 beats per minute and Paranoia Survivor Max was 290 beats per minute. So I put the steps for PSMO in Survivor. I don't think I ever actually used it really. Like I just kept playing PSMO, but Ash had that edit. And I remember him practicing that edit to try to learn PSMO even back then. So Ash really just like he threw people off guard, but we had people, you know, these are all my friends at the time. Like this is like my world. Not only is DDR my world, but like the people that we were playing DDR with, like DDPD and such, like these are my friends. And then we had people who weren't officially in DDPD, but I just say like
we hung out with these people so much. Like these were like affiliated. So, you know, my friend Sarah, like I mentioned Sarah before, I fights real well. She was playing with us, and Sarah was crazy when it came to like 10 footers and options. That's just, she didn't really play the perfect attack. She would just like play really fast stuff on shuffle without the bar. That was like her thing. Like PSMO on 6 option, PSMO on shuffle, max 300 on shuffle, hidden. Like Sarah would just play crazy stuff to see if she could pass it. And she would go to tournaments. Like a lot of times we would have like female DDR tournaments. She would go and she would wind up winning just because like somebody would pick like, I don't know, like somebody would pick like Era or like an 8-footer on Sarah. She would play it and get more perfects than them, and then she would pick like max 300 regular, and that to her that was just like a warm up. Like, and then like a lot of female. I'm using the word. I don't like using the word females generally. I'm just using it like just because we would say female DDR tournament, but a lot of girls or women at the time couldn't even really pass the 10-footers back then, and Sarah was like double Aing them, so she would pick, her song would be whatever, and then, you know, she would get a lot of easy wins when it came to like the female division DDR tournaments. So we had Sarah. She wasn't in DDPD, but she hung out with us a lot. And then we had Don Frequency at this time, like around 2004. Don was around a lot. Don, I don't remember if this was when Don still lived in Long Island or he moved, because Don eventually moved into his own apartment in Queens. But Don was hanging out with us a lot. And Don had a car, so he would come through, pick us up, and take us to, you know, we would hang out with Don, or he would take us to arcades, and one of my favorite memories in DDR. 2004 was a great year in DDR. I wish that there's part of me that wishes that the Jacob Javis tournament in 2005 happened in 2004, because 2004 just felt like, I'm like, the way that I'm like touching my chest, it just had the nicest, best DDR feeling. It was still close enough to like when Extreme came out that it wasn't like, Extreme wasn't like super duper old. I wouldn't say that Extreme was like really, really old in 2005 either, but you know, 2005, and it was like people were just like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing, Konami? So, you know, DDR Supernova came out in 2006, but I feel like Konami kind of, by that time, In the Groove and In the Groove 2 came out, and people had already kind of given up on DDR, and that was Konami's fault. Like, that was 100% their fault. So 2004 just felt good, and one of my best memories that I have is like, we would go to this like restaurant slash, it was just like a restaurant called Witch's Brew in Long Island. And I remember like Don driving down the highway doing like 60, 70 miles per hour, driving either to or from Witch's Brew, listening to the song Vijor by Anokin. And like, this was just like, it just, the vibe was like DDR trance music, you know, having fun with your friends, going to arcades. We would do this thing called S'mores, where we would go to like, either Adam or Anita, one of their relatives had a cabin that we would go all the way upstate to on the weekends, and Don was there for those, and we would go there. We would go to Crossgates Mall and play DDR for the weekend, and then drive back down to the city. So like that I don't know where we were going, but I remember just being in the car with Don, listening to Vijor by Anokin, driving down the highway with the windows open. Just such a great time. That 2004 time, that feeling was like I was on top of the world. This is like, in my next video, I'll get into like the building blocks of like 2004 and the atmosphere in New York at the time. But that aura was so magical. That's the best word that I can think of. It was magical around that time. So we had Don hanging out with us. We also had Deshaun, Perfect Asymmetry. Like, Deshaun had stopped playing DDR, and I have a funny story about Deshaun that I'll talk about in a minute. But like, Deshaun was hanging out with us a lot. So again, Deshaun wasn't in DDPD, but you know, Deshaun did his own thing, but he was around a lot. And Deshaun and Sarah were cool, and Deshaun and Sarah and Blake were also cool. So like, Deshaun was hanging out with us too. We were hanging out with Deshaun too. We had a friend named Russ. I used to love being around Russ. Russ was really fun. He was a really big guy, and he would come through and hang out with us a lot and play DDR. I don't think I've ever. It's like Russ was like the only. I don't think I've ever seen Russ mad before. Like he was like just this really positive guy to be around. He was a good friend at the time. And then we had Gilbert, and Gilbert was like really, really young, much younger than us, but like was at the arcades all the time, and really good for being like 4 or 5 or 4 or 6, like really short and really good. And I think Gilbert went along to become like one of the best in New York after I stopped playing, along with Spencer and Nick. But yeah, Gilbert also used to hang out with us a lot. So that was a really good time. Deshaun, the funny thing about Deshaun was that Deshaun just had like this mysticism around him, especially when it came to 10-footers, because I mentioned before that we never saw Deshaun play any 10-footers. Like he just didn't play 10-footers, and every time Deshaun would go to play a 10-footer, it was like something happened, or like he would do really good. He would like AAA the first half of Max 300 and then step off the pad, or like it was always something where we never actually got to see Deshaun play 10-footers. So on this particular day, I believe this was 2003. We were in Broadway City, and we were playing DDR Extreme. They had moved the machines all the way to the back. If you remember Broadway City, like this is where they used to have the pump it up machines, and they put them all the way in the back. So, you know, Deshaun at Perfect Symmetry is already retired. He gets on the pad, and like, even though at this time I think this may have been around the time where like it kind of switched over from me to Stefan, or maybe Stefan was still kind of running things, but I was really good. So like 10-footers were like all that was on my mind. So Sean gets on the pad. You don't really like the etiquette was like you don't want to like sweat people or like look exactly like when they're playing. Like you don't want to be all up in their shit. But whenever Deshaun played, you know, it was kind of hard to ignore, because like he usually produced some good stuff even after he retired. So he's playing. I don't remember if he was playing with me or he picked Paranoia Survivor by himself, but he picked a 10-footer. Like either whoever he was playing with or he was playing by himself. Paranoia Survivor, he like scrolled to it. So now we're like, yo, I want to see what Deshaun is gonna do with Paranoia Survivor. Like, is he like, cause he has the ability to like, I could see Deshaun like getting under 10 greats on this song now, which would have been crazy. So he hits the select button to play the song, and now we're all just like, oh shit, you know, we get to see Deshaun play, and the machine shuts off. But then we're like, oh man. So then we noticed the whole back room of Broadway City shuts off. So now we're all spooked out, like damn, like Deshaun was about to play a 10-footer, and the universe was like, no, we're just gonna shut down Broadway City. So we learned that all of Broadway City, within like a 30 or 40 second, we learned that all of Broadway City had shut down, the whole arcade. So we went outside because they were closing it down, and we went outside and we realized all of Times Square, the whole everything was off. So we were like, yo, Deshaun picked the 10-footer, and instead of him being able to play it, all the electricity in Times Square went out. And we come to find out after a few minutes, this was like the 2003 blackout. This was the New York City blackout. But it just, as soon as it was like the timing was so perfect. As soon as he pressed the select button to play the song, the power went out. And this was just like one of the many stories that people have of like how Deshaun was like, he was like a wizard almost. Like he would do things that like kind of gave off like weird mysticism, like, and we like I just wanted to see him play Paranoid Survivor, but yeah, this was just kind of level setting, like setting the stage of like where my life was at the time. This episode was a little bit more personal, so like this was what was going on, and then like in my in the next episode that I want to talk about like 2004 and like what the environment was for DDR or around this time. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Feel free to share my playlist or share these videos, and in the comments let me know what you think. If I got any information wrong, let me know. Or just if you're enjoying the videos, let me know too. And I'll be back with another one soon.